I've had several questions come up about the financing of the one person course and feel a window opening where I can go backstage and share a little bit about the economic sociology of the Shala. The one person course is running May, June, and it's a class for 40 people on perceiving a single person, creating a perceptual field to meet another. And in that field, offer something of what you know around the breath. Maybe that's it. The one person who is offering their energy and their time and their heart to you, all 40 of you in this course, is the teacher. Always the person who is in the most vulnerable situation is the teacher. So this has nothing to do with Mysore style. It has nothing to do with teaching classes or groups. This is sensory training. You know that Ashtanga is sensory training. Breath Bandha Trishti is training all of your 6 senses to go within. So now, after you have had a very minimum of 10 years of strong and consistent practice, and probably more, we're taking one extra half step in the sensory training to not just be in the pratyahara, the inward focus training of the senses, but now to include in the perceptual field another. This is huge. This is a major threshold. And so we're going to take 8 weeks together and the generosity of your one person to open up this 7th aspect of the sensory field. And as this whole thing comes together, of course, I'm only doing because 6 or 7 of our locals really wanted it, and then I figured since it was happening, I would open it up to several others of you who I know. This question about the real nuts and bolts of our Shala has come up because for the very first time, I'm charging for a course. And up until now, for 16 years, the only training in method that I have ever done is apprenticeship. This is what Mysore style is. You cannot learn how to teach Mysore style in a training. This is one of the most important things in the method. You are chosen because a teacher sees that you're capable to receive from their implicit know-how the inarticulate stuff of being a teacher. So you're invited to come into their fully built out perceptual field within the space of a Mysore room and hopefully start to pick stuff up. That's what apprenticeship is. That's how you learn to teach Mysore style. And I've mentioned that I will charge for this course, unlike with apprenticeship, because the Shala is in a place where I'm traveling more, and I want to make sure we have deep well of financial capacity to pay the other teachers when I'm away. And that's a very serious prospect for us as an institution. Those of you who have been brave to ask what that's about, and this whole thing of me for the first time charging on a sliding scale for some kind of a training that's not just paying Shala fees, which is this whole other like deeply theorized thing in the mind of me, the economic sociologist and community builder. I wanted to break the best taboo for breaking, which is the one on money. This is actually why the way that I approach Shala fees at our shala is really deep and fundamental and very much in the hands of the students. And that is that if I can talk with you about money, then that opens up the doors for us to build a trust relationship that covers everything else. I mean, Mulabunda, your hormones, your menstrual cycle, the stuff going on in your mind, it's all on you how much you want to disclose. There's no intake for me. But if we build a foundation of trust where the scariest thing for most people of money is opened up as a vulnerable mutual conversation from the get-go, then, like, if we can start by being very real, it seems to really build a foundation for mutual trust and respect for the very long run. So, why would I need to fundraise to pay teachers at the Shala? Notice I'm not saying subs. There are no subs at the Shala. The only few people that will ever teach, I respect them because I chose them and I trained them. Their skills are theirs. And they are free agents in their expression of their skill set. Yoga is a philosophy and a practice of liberation. If that's not expressing itself on this most nuts and bolts material, practical plane, then what are we even doing? I don't want to create a system in which the fully realized teachers who don't even get into doing service until their cup is full and overflowing are somehow stand-ins for me. That gives me space to be my own idiosyncratic person who has skills and deficiencies, who is always also the student, and hopefully gives every other one of the small number of teachers the esteem in their own work such that their voice is not inhibited. Their vision is clear. It's not simply a matter of what would Angela see, what would Angela say. I will say that in my work, there's always that piece of what would Shirachi see and say. Always, always, always. And that's also the case with my mentor, Dominic Corleano. And that's actually very, very, very beneficial because I'm participating in this flow of shared knowledge. And at the same time, we have to be a person in the world. And the whole point of our Shala is that it be a school, that it be a place where people realize themselves and their capacity. In the case of the teachers, their capacity to serve. In the case of every student, you realize your own capacity and potential in your practice and in your life. So, there are very, very roughly two models in play in the North American yoga world in this time. This is a bit of a specious distinction, but it works for what I'm going to explain. So let's say there are yoga stores and yoga schools. This is all happening under the umbrella of very, broken capitalism that isn't really capitalism anymore in the North American context. So a yoga store, which might call itself a studio or even a shala, is identifiable by its revenue model. The revenue model of a yoga store is exploitation of labor and selling you shit you don't need. So that an excess of monetary income is generated. So you have to find the differential in the input and the output of sort of the energy economy in money terms. And so you're going to do that by extracting value from the labor of the people in your employ, and by commodification, by selling shit. Even creating sellable commodities out of thin air. Yes, that is a Marx reference. Then let's take the paradigm of the yoga school, which might also call itself a studio or a shala. This, again, within this sort of very, very deteriorated and sort of broken capitalism that is whatever is happening in the first quarter of the 21st century, the way they're getting revenue is through education. So a school, ideally, and this certainly doesn't apply to the university in the town in which I lived, which is very much a store. In a school, there's not the same model of looking for revenue in money terms, right? So there's not the need to maximize shareholder value or maximize owner income. There's rather the bottom line will be learning. Well, like if an organization conceptualizes itself as a school, there's just different accounting. We're looking at relationships. We're looking at stability of the learning process. You get what you account for. This is a pretty ironclad law of organizations. Whatever you account for, you're going to maximize for. And in a school, you're probably maximizing for learning, however that's conceptualized. So in the field of yoga, whatever that is, yoga is pretty hard to define, right? One could take the understanding that yoga is a philosophy, a process, a practice of liberation. If that is the case, the whole model over here of the yoga store is gonna generate all kinds of contradictions and dissonance. Because in a yoga store, the best way to make money is to pay the laborers less than what they're generating. And also to, as I said earlier, to create commodities that have their own revenue generation capacity. So obviously, that would be by having the majority of the work done by people who are in some, like whose value isn't particularly, whose labor isn't particularly valued emotionally or energetically. So maybe you're making, I recently made $35 a class teaching Mysore style. And that is far less than the organization brings in for the income that the students are coming for, right? So that excess, the extraction of the value, goes back to the store. This makes sense. Like, this is in many ways like very good practice. The question that I'm raising is how much sense it makes in a philosophy of liberation, because there are consequences of the model of the teacher being the major node of value extraction. And the main one is that it's not just monetary value that's extracted. Very often in a yoga store, the teacher isn't expected to necessarily have deep wisdom. They might even be called as a sub. They might even be called as a trainee. The expectations of the skill that they're bringing are really quite low. What they have to offer is not themselves, but actually getting the work done. And then the second way that revenue comes in a yoga store is, of course, teacher trainings. This is, I do claim, shit you don't need. But say you do pay $2,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 for a teacher training. Almost always this is done with the intent of deepening one's own practice, because students and yoga itself are so much bigger. They cannot be but contained by the yoga store model. So very often people will take these teacher trainings because they value the learning and the knowledge, and they want to become a person who is holding and expressing and understanding the wisdom of yoga, right? So it's so paradoxical in many ways. But what happens, to the degree that you buy into the yoga store mentality, that at the end of your teacher training, you have a certificate and now you're qualified to teach, or at least apply to teach, is the deep truth of the sunk cost feeling, that you've invested so much of yourself and also money, but your time and your subtle energy and your care into this teacher training, that there's a implicit motive for so many, like the best humans, to actualize that by applying the knowledge as teachers without tracking on the brilliance of this extractive model, right? So you've paid to learn, and then you'll pay to work. Essentially, if your labor is being effectively extracted by the yoga store, you're working for far, 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 far less than you're worth. But on the subtle level, in your heart, there may still be the sense of actualization, because you're putting into practice what you accidentally learned in your teacher training that you took to deepen your own personal knowledge. So there's a lot of good that can happen in there. And I have done all that stuff myself and learned a lot about what not to do, but also some things about what to do. And then let's go back over here to the yoga school model. So if we're trying to hold this value of yoga as a process of liberation, as tools for liberation, as a means of liberation, then this stuff really actually matters. It has to do with the soul of your organization. And I would submit to you that every organization is its own egregore. It has its own energetic reality. A shala has a soul. A shala has subtlety and logic and something more than the sum of its parts. And to reproduce these extractive models of the yoga store in the context of a school has consequences. There's karma there. And one would want to be very circumspect about how much of the extraction logic that is just in the air we breathe one wanted to put into practice if they were running a school. And still, though, a school is situated in broken capitalism. So our school, for example, has astronomical expenses. I believe in being accessible, so we're on Main Street, so we pay astronomical rent. Insurance is insane. The cost of electricity is insane. All of the things, right? Not only that, I would submit that each teacher in our school is also of value, and that is a value that, in addition to spiritual, energetic, emotional aspects, is also materially valuable in a way that might connote actual income. So for us, when the Shalas started, the first time I left would have been 2010. And then for even longer, I was gone for 3 months, I believe, in 2011. there were always these 2-3 month trips where I'd be gone in the dead of winter, and someone would take the chair, as they say in Star Trek. You respect the chair. Teaching is a role. Teaching is not being a little Angela. Well, everybody's bigger than me. Teaching is assuming the chair. So from the beginning, back in the day, that was $100. I didn't care if there were 3 people in the room. And now with inflation, I've bumped it up little by little. And so the rate that I pay for teachers in my stead, it's an hour and 45-minute shifts stretching to 2 hours, is $130. I consider that really low. That's only $65 an hour to actualize a level of skill that required decades and decades of preparation to be able to offer, that cannot be reduced to numbers in any way. A teacher is not somebody defined by numbers, not their income, not the number of students they have. My God, the best teachers sometimes have a single student. Not their followers, especially not that. And so putting the number of 130 that's still awkward. That's still painful. And I would rather that it be 1,030,030. And we do what we can in the broken capitalism that we're working in. The way that I've come to that number back in the day was what I would get for teaching a class at the yoga store. I think it was $15. And that, like when I was teaching at the yoga store, I was doing that purely to actually from a place of radiance, of having more to offer, and also knowing that I was learning so much through that teaching. I was back in yoga store logic. It was actually kind of great. In any case, I took whatever I was making and giving to charity. Like I told the yoga store people, I'm not actually keeping this for myself, because it like $15 to $25 for a class doesn't actually make a dent in my personal needs. But karmically, it can be meaningful if I offer it to, in those days, I was offering it to Witness for Peace, which was an organization that worked towards mutual understanding throughout the Americas. So I took that number and I multiplied it by 4 or 6. At least with the intent to make it hurt a little bit on the behalf of the Shala. So the Shala is going to value the work of the teachers so greatly that's going to, it's going to be financially costly. And this means that baked into the logic of this organization, deeply imperfect as it is, and deeply situated within capitalism as it is, there's gonna be this sense that the act of teaching, whoever it's being done by, is weighted heavily. Because a teacher should be heavy. They should have gravitas. And in those days, that was almost impossible to do. So it also kept me honest to never creating situations where other people were doing my work for me. There was a sense that they were doing their work in their own respectable terms, and then I would come and take the chair and do my own work, which is the same, which is holding the space. There's not something outside of that or better than that. The highest value of a Mysore teacher is to hold space in a Mysore room, not to teach workshops, not to ever be a sage on a stage, none of that. The yoga school in the Ashtanga world is just a place for being together in the room, and that's its full expression. The other thing that I wanted to do from the beginning when I took the yoga store number and multiplied it by 4 or 6 was I kind of wanted to ruin people for the yoga store. And I think we've succeeded. If somebody has met my standards, and there are very, very few who have, and those are standards for you, those are standards for the students, as being ready to serve, then it should be weird to go back to the yoga store and enter into the deals where the organizational logic is extraction of the value of the labor. And sometimes we still choose to do it because there's so much side benefit in participating in those models. We have to stay discerning. Like, sometimes it's actually great to transcend all of these logics and just show up in a way that's effervescent. But now you have it. The main things that guide me around these things are that teachers are free agents. They are not substitute for other humans. They come into this work as a result of so much preparation and depth and radiant excess of the actual work. And there is something that is outside of the monetary and the capitalist thinking that they have to offer. And we find ways of valuing that on institutional terms. And I kind of think it's beautiful to have the one-person course be a way of filling our coffers so that we continue to value the act of teaching. And a lot of the travel that I'm going to do isn't necessarily going to be remunerative. And I'm okay to be a sucker in capitalist terms, because in spiritual terms, emotional, relational, there's such a flourishing of love and practice and knowledge and insight that comes from any classroom experience. If it's not done to make ends meet, if it's not done to advance the career. So all of this goes together. The motivation for action, the way that we fund it, and the very intent and soul of the organizations that we create every day by showing up.